Well, it is an absolutely pleasure to come back. I know with this pandemic and everything that happens in our lives, I think so. It's a gift to be back. And I hope that you are sitting in your home and you are relaxed. You are maybe having a cup of coffee or a glass of wine or sparkling water, whatever you have around. But I'm so happy that you are taking time away from your family, taking time away from your, normal duties, and you want to learn and you want to listen to this webinar. So from my heart, a big thank you. Honestly, I is something that I never imagined in my life, that I will be giving webinars and people and friends and colleagues around the world, they will be sitting and honestly, for me, that's a joy that there is no ways like the commercial priceless. You sitting there in the computer, I'm sitting here in my computer, you are in different places, you are in different time zones. And honestly, I wish I have, a camera who can show me everybody watching and listening to this webinar, because I will send you a virtual hug and a virtual thank you. It's my pleasure to be tonight. I hope that your family is doing well, your mom, your dad, your brother, your sisters, your children, everybody's doing well. We are together. Honestly, these are very difficult times for everybody living in this planet. So I truly believe that education and having the opportunity to meet using technology is a wonderful opportunity that this coronavirus gave to us. And so I'm so happy to be doing and happy to be presenting this webinar. So tonight we are going to talk about one of my, probably my favorite topic as a pediatric dentist. I think so if you are, a dentist and you are on the other side of your computer sitting, I think that you feel the same pain that I feel when I'm going to take radiographs in children. It's not easy. And I do that pretty much every single time that I'm in my office. I need to take some radiographs of bite wings and periapicals. So this webinar is about imaging in pediatric dentistry. It's a nice 55 minutes that we are going to have to review a little bit about a couple of important issues related with pediatric imaging. So I promise from my heart, I will do everything that I can to make this webinar educational, productive. That when we say goodbye and have a good night, you close your eyes and you feel that it's worth it to spend with me this 60 minutes or 55 minutes. Okay, so we are going to start. That's me. I'm an associate professor of pediatric dentistry at Indiana University School of Dentistry. My home is Indianapolis, Indiana, which I'm located exactly about in the middle of the United States, in the Midwest, starting just to leave a little bit of summertime and spending a little bit more time outside. We were in a lockdown here in Indiana. I'm sure you in your hometown, you were in the same situation, but slowly we are coming back to this new normal. The things obviously are not going to be like the old days before all these issues came to our lives. But here in Indiana, we are coming back. I work in a children's hospital downtown. And for many, many years before becoming a pediatric dentistry, I was a radiologist. And I was the director of radiology at the University of Kentucky. And then later on in my life, I decided to be a pediatric dentistry. So I always, when I present these topics about imaging in pediatric dentistry, honestly, this is a good combination of my background in radiology and my background as a pediatric dentist. Remember, we pediatric dentists, or you as a dentist working with children, we work in the kingdom of tears. I mean, our kids come and they cry, and sometimes taking radiographs is challenge. And we are going to learn in this webinar what strategies we have to try to make the appointment a little bit easier, and more important than that, to try to get good quality images. So this webinar is sponsored by Air Techniques. I love Air Techniques, I need to say, and I need to disclose that openly. I have been a speaker for Air Techniques for a while. I love Air Techniques, and they have been extremely nice with me. So this webinar is sponsored by Air Techniques, and I will chat and talk a little bit about how Air Techniques products can fit within this webinar. This webinar is not about, these are different topics that I present sometimes. This webinar is not about radiographic interpretation. This webinar is not about common radiographic lesions in children. And this webinar is not about, well, you want to buy a new panoramic machine, if I can give you some advice. Well, I'm saying this because sometimes when I provide webinars in radiology, sometimes you may actually are expecting that I will go through the 5 YEPES steps of a good radiographic interpretation, or we are going to have a detailed radiographic description of odontogenic keratosis or ameloblastic fibrodontoma. Just be patient. I will be preparing a lot more webinars in the next few months, and I will be giving webinars about radiographic interpretation, about common radiographic lesions in children, and yes, we can actually have a webinar about panoramic machines. So this webinar is about that challenge that we are all walking together. Imagine that we are all together in the same pathway. We are dentists. We see children in our office, and we want to take good quality films. And sometimes you can look at we can call that a bite wing, but obviously it's a bite wing with a lot of mistakes. It's overlap and a lot of issues. And believe me, I feel this in my day. I am with you in the same boat. That frustration when you are in the office and you are trying to get some films, you have this kid, clinical evidence of dental caries, and the spaces between the interproximal spaces are closed, and you really want to know if it's interproximal caries because that will change your treatment plan. And decay you cannot smell. It's not like, wow, mom, it smells that there is decay between the first and the second primary molars in the left side, or oh, mom, it smells. No, sometimes, it is frustrating when you tell your assistant, let's go and take a film, and we don't get a good film. So this webinar is about that. So these are the goals for the webinar. We are going to remember the basic concepts in radiation safety and protection. I think it's important when we talk about radiology in children to go over a little bit of radiation safety and protection, because at the end, we need to understand that with kids, we need to be careful. We need to be careful with all the patients, but especially with children, when we need to retake a radiograph, is double the amount of radiation. And sometimes, I know that, sometimes we try 3-4 times to try to get one film. So that child is receiving a lot more radiation that in just taking one film. So we need to remember a little bit of radiation safety. Also understand the importance of obtaining good quality radiographs in pediatric patients. We are going to talk about different technologies in the dental office. And at the end of the webinar, we are going to briefly go over other non-ionizing radiation alternatives for the diagnosis of interproximal caries. What means is, briefly, I'm going to mention at the end, if definitely taking a radiograph is not an option for whatever reason you are dealing. So you are looking at your assistant, looking at the mom and say, what else, what options I have? So at the end of this webinar, I'm going to have the opportunity to touch base about non-ionizing radiation alternatives, which honestly, here in my office, I use that in some occasions and really helps me when I don't have any other options. So there is a lot of progress in imaging in pediatric dentistry. On the image on the left side, that is when I was in dental school. Obviously, I'm an old guy. So when I was in dental school, I remember these cone X-ray heads that pretty much as soon as you, which means you press the button and you generate X-rays, these X-rays will go everywhere. It doesn't matter if you will be, you never will have a concat using that kind of cone X-ray heads. But in these days, on the other hand, you can see the right side, we have this amazing portable X-ray devices that we can carry that through the whole office, and that will really facilitate to take the films. So these are some of the progress in the last 20 years in imaging in the pediatric patient. Obviously, we have better equipment. I don't want to talk about that. Receptors, we have digital radiology, and in the old days, and again, I'm an old guy, I used to use conventional film, CS speed, and then DS speed, and then I hope that if you are still using conventional radiology, I truly hope that you are still using E and F, the fastest available film, which is F, or if you are moving into digital radiology, or maybe you're already working with digital radiology. So we have a lot of progress in terms of receptors. Collimation is one of the things that we are going to touch base in this webinar. We went through no collimation, which is that cone that I show you in the picture, and then we went to round collimation, and then back to rectangular collimation, and then in these days, seems like the standard is round collimation, but I will tell you how important it is to come back to rectangular collimation. And that's one of the key points of this webinar. We need to get back to rectangular collimators. I know it's a pain. I know, what are you thinking sitting? Okay, Dr. J or Dr. Yepes, are you telling me that I need to move to rectangular collimation, but that comes with a price. If we move to rectangular collimation and we don't use an X-ray positional device, we may actually increase the retakes because we may actually see more concuts. So we were briefly going to talk about that. Dark room, well, in these days, if you are using digital, we don't use anymore the dark room. And finally, selection criteria, we went from none to pediatric patient in the 1970s to what we call as low as diagnostically possible, all ALADA. So we really, in these days, we have diagnostic criteria, we have selection criteria. So we have some guidelines that we use at the time that we decide to take radiographs in children. So let's go with radiation safety in pediatric dentistry. Just relax. This is probably the time of my webinar that you can use to have a sip of your wine, your coffee. Let's review some of the concepts of radiation safety in pediatric dentistry. So we care about radiation safety in the kids. The first couple of slides are about something that I hope that you are aware. It's about the Alliance for Radiation Safety in Pediatric Imaging. That's a coalition of healthcare organizations around the world, and especially here in the United States, dedicated to providing safe, high-quality pediatric imaging worldwide. You know, the Alliance for Radiation Safety in Pediatric Imaging is not just only for dental. In fact, this alliance, which we call Image Gently, was born from pediatric radiologists, from the medical side. And then with dentists, we joined this national coalition, which now is international coalition. And the idea is to create some knowledge and awareness in the imaging community. And believe it, we are imaging community. We are dentists and we take imaging in our office on the need to adjust radiation dose when we are doing imaging in children. So that's the website. I will invite you when you have the time or you don't have anything to do to go to the website. And that's a wonderful website who will give you a lot of resources. So that's Image Gently. And one of the resources that you are going to find in Image Gently is this brochure. If you have any trouble downloading the brochure, later on I will give you my email, and you can send this to you can send me an email and I can email you this brochure, which is a very nice. I wrote this a couple of years ago and we uploaded to the website. If you go to the Image Gently website, there is a tab about dental, and then you go there and then you are going to find this, dental x-rays for children, what parents should know. And it's a nice, to the point, easy to read information from mom and dad about dental x-rays, from what is a bite-win, what is a panoramic film, to what is the amount of radiation when we take a panoramic film or when we take a bite-win. So in Image Gently, we care about children. Like I remember this girl, I was covering the clinic when this girl was walking in front of me and she went directly into the radiology suite. And then I saw that the assistant was trying to get a panoramic film. And I called the assistant and I asked her, why are you taking a panoramic film in this girl? And she said, well, really, I don't know. I called my resident and I asked the resident why. And he said, well, I am taking a panoramic film because I really want to know if all the teeth are present. Obviously, that's not a good justification. So my point is, 4-year-old, which is the age of this girl, is, in my opinion, a little bit young to have a panoramic film. But if you have a justification, that's fine. But if you don't, it's probably not appropriate to go and jump and take a panoramic film in this young girl. So I don't want to give you the idea, especially when we talk about radiation safety, that this webinar or this section of the webinar is about don't take radiographs. Of course not. We need to take radiographs. Radiology and radiographs are part of the process that we call diagnosis. So we need to take radiographs, and yes, sometimes it's challenged according to the patient age, but my point is not to keep you away from radiographs. My point is to understand that every time that you press the button, you are generating radiation, ionizing radiation, and we need to do as many different things as we can to protect that child from the over effects of ionizing radiation. In these days, moms and dads, they seem to be a little bit more well informed about dental x-rays. And I will show you a couple of examples in a couple of different sources, which these sources are not dental sources, about some information that is outside, and sometimes it's a little bit of misleading. For example, this article in The Economist is not a dental journal, but the title of the article is Little and Not Often, Please. And if you read the first sentence, confirmation that dental x-rays can be bad for you. So if you read the article, it seems like the article is trying to point at dentists that we overuse dental x-rays. I am not going to go into the debate if we are taking the radiographs that we needed or maybe taking more of the radiographs that we needed. But my point is, mom and dads and families, they may actually are getting information from sources not really very scientific, and maybe they will come to the office, challenge you at the time that you decide to take a radiograph. This is in WebMD, dental x-rays linked to brain tumors. And this is ABC News a couple of years ago, early dental x-rays linked to brain tumors. The New York Times, radiation worries for children in dental chairs. And CNN, are dental x-rays dangerous? So at the end, I hope that you get the point that moms, dads, and families, they may are actually informed about some of the side effects of dental x-rays. And that's the time that we need to be careful and need to explain to the parents that we are doing everything that we can to minimize as much as we can the amount of radiations. So we really need to balance. And balance means that we need to take the radiograph that we needed, no even one more that we don't need it, but at the time that we decide to take a radiograph is because we have a good justification. So let's go with what I call Dora the Exploradora in radiation biology and physics 101. So I promise you it's about 2 or 3 slides and that's it. So what is X-rays? So X-rays were discovered by Dr. Rocklin. X-rays are from the electromagnetic radiation spectrum, and they have a great penetrating power. So every time that you X-rays, they will go and fly into the patient head, and they have the ability to penetrate. What else about X-rays? So this is actually X-rays were discovered in 1895 by Dr. Rothem. And this diagram is a good way to understand that when you push the button, we are going to generate some electricity in one side of the X-ray head, and we are going to send electrons from one side to the other side until they hit a little small piece of tungsten. And when the when the electrons hit that, we generate X-rays. And that X-ray, they have the ability to penetrate. So this is the famous electromagnetic spectrum. And I will slow down here just to kind of situate you in this slide. So look at the top of the graphic. We have radiation type, and look at the radiation type. It goes from radio, microwave, infrared, visible light. So X-rays are here. So really the difference between all these different radiation types is the wavelength. Radio waves, that's how they have a long wavelength. And then when you go to gamma rays, which is on the other side of the spectrum, they move pretty quick. So X-rays are in between gamma rays and ultraviolet light. And the only reason that I have this picture here is to remind you that ultraviolet light, which is just to the left of X-rays, is used to kill bacteria, is used to sterilize food. And then the gamma rays, which is on the right of the X-rays, they are used to kill tumors and sterilize medical devices and to kill bacteria. I'm not saying that we are killing things with X-rays, but it's just to give you a perspective that when you look at the electromagnetic spectrum, the neighbors of the X-ray, they clearly have the ability not just only to penetrate, but also the ability to kill. Are children more sensitive to radiation? The answer is yes. Children are more sensitive to radiation. And why children are more sensitive to radiation? So when you have little Johnny and little Charlie sitting there, kids and little Charlie is more sensitive to radiation because they have cells with a high mitotic rate. They have cells who can go to many future mitoses, and they have cells with a very primitive differentiation. Conclusion, little Johnny and little Charlie that you have sitting in the chair, when you are ready to take a radiograph, you need to think twice before taking the radiograph 2 or 3 times. So doing a lot of retakes. Why? Because that child is more sensitive to radiation. This article, and again, you can find a million articles, but if you want to have this PowerPoint, I will give you my email. And also if you want to have the articles, I will give you my email. This is a nice article to remind us that children are at a greater risk than adults of developing cancer when they are exposed to ionizing radiation. I need to be careful here. I'm not saying that we are going to create cancer every single time that we take a radiograph. Of course not. But there is no question that we need to be careful because that little child that is in the dental chair, that child is more sensitive. And according to the previous slide, that child is having more cells who are in a duplication state, that they have the ability to duplicate, and that cells are clearly more sensitive. We care about the scatter radiation. Why it's important when we talk about pediatric imaging? Why it's important to know about the scatter radiation? So let me tell you a couple of things about the scatter radiation. When you press the button, X-rays are going to fly from the X-ray source, which is the X-ray head, and they are going to fly to the patient head, through the patient head, to hit the film. So as soon as the X-rays, they hit my tissues, my cheek and my bone, three different things are going to happen: cohering, scattering, photoelectric absorption, and Compton effect. The only one that I'm going to just dedicate a few words is about Compton effect, because that's the one who explains scattering X-rays flying outside the patient. And that is important for us to know, because every time that we take a radiograph, even, listen this, even if you are placing all the lead aprons and the thyroid collar, some X-rays are capable to hit the thyroid. Yes, we cannot avoid that, but that is one more big red flag every time that we decide to retake a film in a child. We are going to provide more scattering radiation to that child. And yes, even if we are protecting the thyroid, scattering radiation can explain why some X-rays can still hit in the thyroid. So a little bit more about the Compton scattering. So Compton scattering happens when an X-ray interacts with one of the electrons who is in the tissues that I have in my face. So when that X-ray hit that electron, I'm going to generate a scatter photon, a little bit lower energy than the X-ray who was coming, and that scatter photon travels away from the atom. Compton scattering results in the loss of an electron, and a scattering photon, they travel in all directions. Listen this, 30% of the scattered photons formed during dental X-ray exposure, they exit the patient head. So in dental radiology, about 62% of the X-ray, they go under Compton scattering. Take home message, if you're still there, every time that you press the button, some of the X-rays are not going to travel through the patient tissues and hit the film. Some of the X-rays are going to be scattered out of the patient head. And even if we are protecting the patient, some of the X-rays, they may hit some of the sensitive organs of the patient. So even with the proper radiation protection, scattered photons will hit different organs and tissues of the child. So in radiation biology, also one more important concept that I'm not going to explain in many details is every time that we take a bite wing or every time that we take a periapical in a child, there is some cumulative effect. In other words, every single time, imagine I take my first bite wing at the age of 5, and then one more bite wing 6 months later, and then one more bite wing a year later. All this ionizing radiation that I'm delivering to the patient, they have the probability to accumulate into the patient. And then obviously, I can create some effect that we call stochastic effects, which if I do that several times, eventually, after taking a lot of different bite wings or periapicals, I can cause some damage of the cells who are exposed to the ionizing radiation. Definitely the next 3 slides are critical. So let's go slow with the next 3 slides. So we humans, we are exposed to radiation from different sources. We are exposed to natural sources and artificial sources. Dental X-rays belong to the group of the artificial sources, which is about 17% of the amount of radiation that I'm exposed. Natural sources is about 83%, which is mainly coming from either the sun or sun radiation who is in the earth, especially radon, which is a radioactive gas coming from the radioactive decay of the uranium. And this number, I don't care about the units, it's not important for our webinar, but we humans, we are exposed to radiation per year. We call that background radiation. Again, doesn't mean that it's everything X-rays. This is a combination of different sources of radiation, but the number is about 3.4 millisieverts per year. Let's don't care about the millisieverts. Let's just remember 3.4 per year. So if I want to know the amount of background radiation per day, I will need to divide 3.4 and 365, and that will give me the amount of radiation per day. Amount of background radiation coming from natural sources, and again, from artificial sources, which is about 17% of that number. So this slide is critical. Pay attention to this. So when I take a panoramic film, which is in the middle of your chart, a panoramic film, the effective dose of a panoramic film is about 9 to 26 microsieverts, or about 1 to 3 days of background radiation. So every single time that you take a panoramic film, you are giving to the patient between 1 to 3 days of background radiation. Why the variation? Because not all the panoramic machines are created equal. But what I think is more important for our webinar is, let's take a look at the full mouse series. When you take a full mouse series using a round collimator, I hope that after this webinar, some of you will think seriously to switch for rectangular collimators. So you take a full mouse series with a round collimator, you are going to provide to that patient about 22 days of background radiation. And if the patient is a child, well, keep in mind that that child is more sensitive to radiation. However, if you are like me in my office, we are using rectangular collimation. If you decide to take that full mouse series using rectangular collimators, that's only about 4 days of background radiation. So just using the rectangular collimation significantly decrease the amount of radiation that we deliver to our patients. This chart is pretty much the same. I just decided to include a little bit more information about CAM beam CT. This lecture is not about CAM beam CT, but just to give you an idea, if you take a CAM beam CT in a 10-year-old, and again, if you take a CAM beam CT in a 10-year-old, it's because you have a good justification. That is equivalent, and it's an extended view, that is equivalent to about 13 days of background radiation, 13 days. If you take a CAM beam CT with a small field of view, that's equivalent to 2.8 days of background radiation. So the take-home message is, if you decide that you need a CAM beam CT because you have a good justification, it really, the field of view is changed dramatically the amount of effective dose that you are delivering to the patient. So collimation, absolutely. This is coming from the National Commission of Radiation Protection in Dentistry, the last report for 2019, which I will invite everybody listening to this webinar to really buy it. It's not too expensive. It's about $80 if you live here in the States. And in this National Commission of Radiation Protection in Dentistry, it really encouraged us to use rectangular collimation. Rectangular collimation of the X-ray beam shall be routinely used for periapical radiographs. Why using rectangular collimation is so effective in terms of decreasing the amount of radiation? You can see in this graphic, if you are using a round collimator, the area that you expose is about 34.3 square centimeters. If you use a rectangular collimator, it's only 15.4 centimeters. So there is an exposure reduction of about 55%. My friends, there is no excuse. We need to move into rectangular collimators. Now, if you move into rectangular collimator, you need to be careful because you need to use the X-ray positional device. And also you need to do a retraining with your staff, because if you don't pay attention and suddenly you switch to rectangular collimators, you may end up delivering more radiation to your patient because you are going to have more concats. Concats means more retakes. There are different ways that retrofit or convert your round collimator into rectangular collimators. That's one way to do it. That's the one that I use here in my office. But, and this is a study that we completed here in my school, looking at the difference in radiation between using rectangular collimators and round collimators that we deliver to the thyroid gland. And you can see that in both situations, the dummy that you see is a radiographic phantom that we use for the dosimetry studies. We covered the thyroid with a thyroid collar. And look at the difference of radiation. Using a round collimator, it was 1.2, and using a rectangular collimator was only 0.3. So these are all the different options that you have at the time. If you want to convert, if you work a lot with children, I will invite you to think seriously to convert into rectangular collimators. And all these are the different options that we have available to convert into rectangular collimators. Again, this PowerPoint is yours. I will give you my email in a minute, but these are different options that we have. And this is the picture with the different options that we can convert from round collimators to rectangular collimators. Let's go Dora the Exploradora about image receptors. This is one of the most critical points of my webinar. I'm going to have a pause of 5 seconds. Perfect. So keep in mind that you decide to switch to rectangular collimator. Perfect. So you are doing a giant step to decrease the amount of radiation. But when we talk about the image receptors, I'm sure you, in some point in your life, you feel the same frustrations that I feel when I need to retake a film because maybe the sensor is too big or the sensor, the patient has a gag reflex. So this is an important thing about the image receptors. So let's go in the simple Dora the Exploradora without going into many details here. So if you are still using conventional radiology or conventional films or traditional radiology, so I hope that you are using high speed, the highest available speed, which is the speed group E. So I hope that you are not using slower than E, because obviously if you use a slower film, that means that we need to use more radiation to create the image. So if you look at this graphic, you can see how, dramatic is the effect. Look at the right side, the green tower. That's the amount of radiation when you the amount of radiation that you deliver to the patient when you do a FMX using round collimator and still using a D speed film. But if you use if you switch to rectangular collimators and you use a phosphoro plates and you use a rectangular collimator, look how different is the green tower. So you really decrease the amount of radiation if you are using rectangular collimators and digital radiology or the highest available speed film if you are still with the conventional. So let's go with digital radiology, which is one of the center points of this webinar. So digital imaging, digital imaging is less radiation. So we need less radiation to generate the image, but we need to be careful because it's not 100%. So it's not like a 99 less radiation needed to create an image. So the dose reduction using digital radiology compared with the highest speed film in the traditional, which is F, is somewhere between 0 to 50%. Now, when we use phosphoro plates, they have a little bit more tolerance of using a higher KV when we take the radiograph. So we need to be careful when we use phosphoro plates to use the proper KV. Because with PSP, we can be taking a film with a higher KV and then the film is still looking nice, but we use a higher KV so we deliver more radiation to the patient. The other issue that we need to be careful when we use digital imaging is the increase in the number of retakes. Obviously, with the digital imaging, it's a lot easier to retake and it's a lot easier to reach the decision, oh, I'm going to take it, because in the old days, we will need to go to the dark room and it will take more time. But in these days, we need to be careful when we use digital imaging because we can actually increase the number of retakes. So digital imaging, we have, the bad, and the bad is probably taking multiple images. And this is clear, more critical in pediatric dentistry. And that's what we want to avoid. We want to avoid to take multiple images because obviously we take multiple images, at the end we deliver more radiation to the patient. You are not going to believe, but it had also been reported that 7 to 13% of all the dental x-rays taken are retakes. That means that at least here in the US, there are over 100 million unnecessary dental x-rays taken every year in our lovely country. That's amazing high. So we need to do everything that we can, especially with the child, to try to avoid the retakes. Now, the question that people ask me all the time, Dr. J, do you use sensors or you use phosphoro plates? So honestly, we will go into the next few slides, but definitely there is a big difference between using sensors and phosphoro plates, especially working with children, and we are going to review this in the next few slides. So we have different technologies, different size and shapes, and different names. As you can imagine, there are different companies who are working in digital imaging, so we have different names, different technologies, and different sizes. So in a very easy way, we have two different options when we talk about digital imaging. We have the sensors, which the sensor is connected with a cable with a computer, and we have the phosphoro plates. In the phosphoro plates, it's a phosphor-coated plate, and as soon as the X-rays hit the plate, the image is formed, and then we need to take that PSP into a processing station who is going to scanning that phosphoro plates and going to pull out the image and place the image over the computer. So we are going to explain this in a little bit more detail. So these are the sensors. So the sensors collect the image generated by X-rays in a solid semiconductor material. One of the key features about the sensors is the image is available pretty much immediately. And the matrix and the associated readout is an amplifying electronics of the intraoral detectors are enclosed within a plastic housing to protect from the oral environment. So unfortunately, the sensors are, inside that little sensors, we have the back housing, the electronic substrate, we have the chip, we have the fiber optic, we have the scintillator screen, and we have the front housing. So that makes the sensors, no question about that, thicker. Also, with the sensor, the active area is smaller than the total surface area. It's bulky. Some of the manufacturers, some of the companies have addressed these issues in multiple ways. For example, the position of the cable is different in some sensors. And obviously, we are working in small chips and small sensors, but we are still trying to pack everything in this little device, so they are still obviously bulky and bigger than the phosphoroplates. We have three different sensors. We have the CCDs, we have the complementary metal oxide semiconductors, and we have the flat panel detectors. I will just briefly go over the CCDs and the CMOS. Out of the two, probably the most common use in these days by the industry are the complementary metal oxide semiconductors. So the CCDs were introduced in dentistry in 1987. When we expose to radiation, it's basically a silicon plate. And when we expose this silicon plate to radiation, we broke some atoms. And then the number of electron hole pairs that they are formed is proportional to the amount of X-ray exposure. It's an expensive technology. And then the CMOS, which is the base for the digital camera receptors. And the main difference between the CCDs and this technology is the way that pixels are charged and read. Each pixel in the CMOS are isolated from the neighboring pixels, and they are directly connected to a transistor. The majority of sensors that we can see available in the market, they are CMOS. Now, the phosphoroplates, which is and I will tell you why, it really offers some advantage over the sensors. When we decide to take pictures in children, the phosphoroplates, briefly, they absorb and store the energy from the X-rays, and they release this energy as a light when they are stimulated by another light with a proper wavelength. I love this name. The phosphoroplates are euphorium activated barium fluoride halide. That's a wonderful name if you are looking to adopt a new pet. Imagine if you put that name to your pet, euphorium activated barium fluoride halide. That would be nice when you take the pet to the groomer to tell, hey, what is the name of your pet? Euphorium activated barium fluoride. So this beautiful, nice picture, that is exactly what happened. When you expose to X-rays, these phosphoroplates, basically you are going to generate electrons who are going to be captured in the middle of the plate, and they are going to be captured there until you take this phosphoroplate to a unit who is going to expose the phosphoroplate to a laser light. And then as soon as the laser light exposes the phosphoroplate, these electrons are going to be released, and then that's going to be captured by the system, and they are going to create the image. So the number of trapped electrons is proportional to the X-ray exposure, and that represents the latent image. So if, for example, a lot of X-rays hit that part of the phosphoroplate, a lot of electrons will be trapped. Other areas of the phosphoroplates are probably not going to be hit by X-rays, so less electrons are going to be trapped there. So phosphoroplates, they come in different sizes. When the electrons trapped in the phosphoroplate, when they are stimulated by a red light, the barium fluoride halide releases the trapped electrons, and the light is released, and that's converted into electrical energy, and that generates the image. So the variations in voltage output from the phosphoroplates corresponds to variation in the stimulated light intensity from the latent images. Phosphoroplates, they come in different sizes, and that's a big advantage. Sensors are more limited in terms of the sizes, and the handling characteristic of the phosphoroplates are very similar to the traditional intraoral films. Before we expose, again, the phosphoroplates, we need to erase the information so we can reuse it, and they retain the information for about 12 to 24 hours, depending on several factors. And also one of the good advantages of the phosphoroplates is it's 100% active diagnostic surface area. so you are not missing like with the sensors. So once you take the image, then you need to take that to the scanner, and there are different scanners available. For example, for air techniques, I will go in details what phosphorus scanners are available for air techniques and which one is the one that I'm using. But there is no question that the phosphorus plates, they offer a lot of advantage when I'm working with children. They are easy to place in the mouth. They are thinner. Kids will have a better tolerance. And because they look like the old films, it's a lot easier for the patient to accept these films inside the mouth. So these are all the family of different scanners that we have with Air Techniques. The ones that I have in my office are the Scan X Swift, which will allow me to scan phosphorus plate size 0, 1, and 2. And also I have the Scan X Swift View, which is a wonderful, because also will come with Wi-Fi capabilities. And also the Scan X Swift View will give me the option to scan 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So different sizes. But you know, Air Techniques come with scanners who will allow you to process several phosphorus plates at the same time. These are the ones that I'm using in my office. I have the Scan X Swift, which will allow me to work with 0, 1, and 2, and the Scan X Swift View 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, which also allow me to be Wi-Fi connected. I need to say that in a pediatric dental office, especially we see the little ones, and when I call the little ones are the 5, the 6, the 7-year-old, but when we work with teenagers, we also have the capabilities to switch into sensors. So with the old ones, sometimes I go with the phosphorus plate, sometimes I go with the sensor, but there is no question with the kids, I prefer to use the phosphorus plates. And this is one example, the size number 1, putting that in the patient mouth. For these particular pictures, I didn't use the X-ray positional device, which always I use that, but I was just telling my assistant to take the pictures. And then when you see on the other side, that's my X-ray portable. That is a wonderful tool that is very handy to operate in a dental pediatric practice or in a general practice if you are using, if you are seeing kids. So let's go a little bit comparing sensors and phosphorus plates in terms of the contrast resolution. So the contrast resolution is the ability to distinguish different densities in the radiographic image. The contrast resolution is a function of the interaction of different factors: the computer display, the observer, the attenuation characteristic of the tissues, the capacity of the system to distinguish difference in the number of photons. Honestly, between conventional radiology and digital radiology, if you use conventional radiology, it's important that you turn down the lights. If you are using, you are using digital radiology, it's important, or digital display, it's important that you turn down the lights of the room, because that will increase the ability for you to have a better diagnostic task. If you're still using conventional radiology, turning down, because you need to use a megatoscope, turning down the lights is not critical. How about the spatial resolution? I would go to the end. Sensors and phosphorus plates are pretty much the same. So spatial resolution is the capacity for distinguish very fine detail in an image. Resolution is reported in units of line pairs per millimeter. The typical observer are able to distinguish about 6 lines per millimeter without any magnification. So in terms of which one is better, sensors and phosphorus plates, they operate in a very similar way when we talk about spatial resolution. How about the detector latitude? So detector latitude is something that is important, which I'm not going to discuss in detail here. It will take me a completely different seminar to go through this. But the detector latitude is the ability of an image receptor, either a sensor of a phosphorus plates, to capture a range of X-ray exposures. So this is important because this is a good quality in the intraoral images, which is the ability to record a broad range of tissue attenuation difference, from the gingival to the enamel, to the dentin, to the pulse chamber, to the interproximal decay. The latitude, or the ability of the image receptor to capture this range, is very similar for direct sensors, or CCD and CMOS. It's very similar to traditional films. However, phosphorus plates, they have a larger latitudes, which means that they have more ability to capture a bigger range of different exposures. So phosphorus plates, they do better with that. However, we need to be careful with that because even if we take the film with a higher kV, phosphoroplates are going to be a little bit more flexible with that higher kV, and they will give us an image which is diagnostic. But we need to be careful because we can even take a film with a higher kV and the image could be still diagnostic. With sensors or with the conventional films, taking a film with a higher kV, the film probably will tell us that the film is coming with a higher kV, so we need to adjust that. So because that, we need to be careful when we use phosphoroplates and make sure that the kV is the appropriate kV to take that film. How about the sensitivity? The sensitivity is the ability to respond to a small amount of radiation. So the phosphoroplate systems for intraoral imaging, the dose reduction is about 50% compared with traditional films. That means that if you are taking films in your office to children and you are using phosphoroplates, you probably can adjust the kV, and that adjustment of the kV to work in a lower kV, that will come with a reduction in about 50% of the radiation that you need compared with traditional film, which is a great advantage of the phosphoroplates. Now, in general, sensors, they require a little bit less exposure than phosphoroplates or films. The conclusion, my friends, if you're still there, if you use digital radiology, if you are using digital radiology in your office, either phosphoroplates or sensors, in general, they need less radiation to generate the image. But listen to this, you need to be careful to adjust the settings of the X-ray machine for the appropriate settings for the system that you are using. Because with digital radiology, especially with phosphoroplates, they are more tolerant to take the films with higher kV. In the old days, if you take the film with a higher kV, with conventional film, the film will be overexposed. So when you process that in the dark room, the film will be black, will be no diagnostic. You generate more X-rays, you generate more energy, and the film is black. But with digital radiology, you need to be careful because they need less, and also they have more flexibility to receive radiation, so you can adjust just moving your mouse, so the image will be diagnostic, but you deliver more radiation if you are not putting that setting appropriate to the system that you are using. Now, let's go a little bit more about what other options we have for carrier detections. So we are going to talk in the next few slides about other options, but before that, let me just say a few words about the handheld X-ray systems. There are several in the market. I'm not going to mention the names, but you know, and this is the one that I use here in my office. I think it's enough to say in just one slide that the doses for the handheld systems are significantly less than the doses for the traditional wall-mounted systems, which is clearly a big advantage. Also, if you work a lot with children or if you are a pediatric dentist, the handheld devices that would allow to keep the patient in the dental chair and also to move that X-ray handheld to different rooms, and obviously that will minimize the patient walking around in case that you have a radiology suite and you walk the patient to the radiology suite. If you have X-ray wall-mounted devices in every operatory, well, you can take films. But in my case, in my office, I have a radiology suite, but using the handheld systems, I can just walk around and take the films that I needed, obviously having all the protection that I'm supposed to have. We did a study, and I can give you all these studies using these systems. I did a study for the Nomad, and also I did a study for the X-ray to go, and we confirmed that the amount of scattered radiation coming to the operator is almost zero. So they are very healthy or are safe systems to operate. The thyroid shielding shall be provided for children always. So we always need to provide the thyroid shielding for kids. So if you combine thyroid shield and also using rectangular collimation and also using maybe a phosphoroplates, you are really going to decrease the number of retakes and you are decreasing the amount of radiation that you deliver to the patients. I always use thyroid collars. I don't like the thyroid collars who are attached to the lead aprons. I prefer to be separate. I believe that that will make me to have a better fit of the thyroid collar over the patient neck. In these days, we have two different systems of lead aprons. We have the lead and the no lead. So the no lead aprons, which are the ones that I use here in my office, they are less heavy than the traditional lead aprons. And sometimes when the lead aprons are used, and very often, like in my office, this difference in weight can be significant for the operator. I need to tell you that both systems are equally effective in attenuating the x-rays. And these are the two different systems, the regular lead and the lead-free. Okay, so just a few words about the extraoral bite wings. That's something that is becoming popular in pediatric dentistry. I am not a fan of extraoral bite wings. And the reason that I'm not a fan is extraoral bite wings are very convenient because obviously you don't need to put anything in the patient's mouth. But I will tell you the problem with extraoral bite wings is, number one, you don't get a lot of detail. So sometimes it's difficult to look for the interproximal caries lesions, which is the reason why we are taking the bite wings. And the other reason is, and we just published a study early this year about the dosimetry. And the other reason is, and I will show you in the next slide, I will skip this slide because I just want to go to this. The other reason is the effective dose. So when you use the extraoral bite wings, you are giving that patient the amount of radiation of one panoramic film, a little bit less than a panoramic film. So rather than half a day of background radiation, which is a bite wing, using a phosphoplate or EF speed film, when you do a pano bite wing, you are delivering to that patient 1 to 3 days of background radiation. So I understand in some situations, the pano bite wings is maybe the only option, but definitely is not my first choice when I'm going to take bite wings in my office. A few words about the guidelines of prescription of radiographs. I think so the most important thing of the guidelines is justification. Every time that you decide to take a film, patient selection criteria is the most significant factor who is going to influence the amount of dose. So every time that you have a child and you are going to take a radiograph is because you have a justification. The justification is a high caries rate. The justification is you cannot see the interproximal spaces. The justification is an abscess, whatever, but you need to have a justification. So justification for the images is the more important, and I hope that you are familiar with the guidelines for taking radiographs. And this is taken directly from the guidelines. They are from 2012, but we are just coming with the new guidelines. I know the American Dental Association is working in the new guidelines. Basically, if you have a new patient, and it's a child with transitional dentition after the eruption of the first permanent tooth, the guidelines will suggest that you do an individualized radiographic exam consisting of posterior bite wings with a panoramic exam or posterior bite wings and selected periapical radiographs. In my office, we take our first panoramic film around the age of 8 to 9. That's around the time that we take the first panoramic film. Okay. So these are all different justifications to take a radiograph. I don't think so it's enough to say that you need to have a justification when you take a radiograph. I'm going to skip a couple of studies that I want to go to the last part of the webinar, which is other options that we have to take radiographs. So we are going to talk in the last 5 to 7 minutes of my webinar about other options. We are going to talk about laser and transillumination to take in the radiographs. And I'm going to skip this part because I'm going to start from here. Okay, if you want to have this webinar, I will tell you my email in a minute. But these are other imaging non-ionizing modalities available for the pediatric dentist and also available for the pediatric patient. Number one, the cameras is a wonderful tool. They are different. I am using the CamX Triton XHD from Air Techniques, and they are different cameras in the market. This camera allow to, number one, to record. You can take the pictures and you can storage that directly in your electronic health records. The cameras will allow also for patient education. Obviously, they don't deliver ionizing radiation. There is also one more, the CamX Elara, which I also have the ability to use that. I am also using transillumination, and the transillumination is a fiber optic that was developed as a diagnostic tool for early and reliable detection of caries without the need of ionizing radiation. The images of the teeth are obtained using visible light with fiber optic transillumination. In theory, this method allowed the dentist to detect demineralization of all tooth surface and can also use to inspect the integrity of the tooth. Transillumination, I will tell you, one of the issues of transillumination is the diagnostic accuracy. The problem is with the transillumination, there is a learning curve, so you need to learn how to, it takes some time, and also the specificity could be lower. So you need to be careful because in some situations you can get false positives. So with time you learn how to use it, but keep in mind the transillumination, one of the issues of transillumination is the lower specificities compared with conventional radiographs. But believe me, sometimes with some kids there is no any other option. So we need to use the transillumination, which I love it, but I need to remind myself that the specificity is lower compared with traditional radiographs. Sometimes white spots, you need to be careful because they can be mistaken as cavitation. So that's the clinical judgment that you need to have when you are using the transillumination systems. The CAM-X Triton from Air Techniques also offer the ability to use transillumination, and that's the one that I use in my office. It takes some time. I would recommend you to really have and look at videos because it takes some time to learn how to use the transillumination and how you can put together the transillumination when you are going to take a decision that maybe is interproximal decay. We are almost done. The laser fluorescent is also something that I use here in my office. Remember that some bacterial metabolites, which these bacteria within the carrier, they produce fluorescent, and that can be enhanced by a laser light. And using this methodology, we can quantify the amount of fluorescent light, and that will give us an idea of the tooth demineralization and the lesion severity. And this is the CAM-X spectra from Air Techniques. The diagnostic accuracy for laser fluorescence is a little bit better than using transillumination. The sensitivity is about 67% and the specificity is 79%, which honestly, the specificity of laser fluorescence is higher than using transillumination, so the number of false positives is lower. The different studies, and you can get all this information, show that the sensitivity of laser fluorescence in some situations could be higher than bite-wind radiographs, but lower, obviously, the specificity is lower of laser fluorescence compared with bite-winds, but it's higher compared with transillumination. To finish, we have the frequency domain photothermal radiometry and modulated luminescence. This is a different system. I don't have this system here in my office. I know it works and I know it's very promising. It's basically when a laser light is projected into the tooth, the system measures the level of luminescence and heat. That's the reason that is photothermal radiometry released by the tooth. The laser light interacts differently from healthy teeth with decay. And to change the pulse of the laser beam, that will give us an idea how deep it does lesion. This system doesn't use fluorescent technology, and there are several, at least one clinical trial comparing this system with conventional radiographs will really show promising results. This is the Canary system, that's the name, and I don't have experience working with this system, but I know it's very promising. So what we learned before we go into, and we say good night, before I want to tell you my email. So this is my email if you want to get this PowerPoint with all the articles. J, F, my last name, Y-E-P-E-S, 1970 @yahoo.com. Again, J, F as in Frank, Y-E-P-E-S, 1970 @yahoo.com. And I will give you this webinar, the complete webinar with all the articles. What we learned: kids are more sensitive to radiation. Rectangular collimators, rectangular collimators, rectangular collimators, rectangular collimators. Justification. With children, as well as with adults, with children, we need to have a justification before we take that radiographs. Digital radiology, yes, is less radiation, needs less radiation to generate the image, but phosphoroplates in the little one, in my opinion, and working here in my office, offers a lot more advantage than the sensors. We also learned that we have other alternatives, no ionizing alternatives, and that was the last part of my webinar, which will go with the cameras, the transillumination, and the laser fluorescent. And the last system, which is the photothermal system, which just opened your eyes that not always, we have alternative that they don't use laser, they don't use ionizing radiation, and we can generate the image. With this, I know there are questions on the air. We don't have more time, it's 1 hour, but I want to ask you a favor from my heart. 2 things before I say goodbye. The first one, thank you. Thank you for spending this hour with me. It means a lot. Secondly, I hope that this will open your eyes. Every time that you decide to take a radiograph with a child, try as much as we can to take a good film so you can avoid retakes. And one of the ways to avoid retakes is using phosphoroplates and also using rectangular collimators. And if you use rectangular collimator, you need to use the XCP, which is the positional device. Finally, please, if you have any question, email me, JF, F as in Frank, Y as in yellow, E as in Edward, P as in Peter, E as in Edward, S as in Sam, 1970@yahoo.com. For everybody, thank you. Have a wonderful night. I hope keep safe, keep healthy, and thank you.